Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we're playing a simple game, stay or go, with all of the major Philadelphia Phillies players that could be on the move this offseason. We'll discuss in today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space here in Philadelphia. I've been on the radio at 97.5 The Fanatic for a good 5 years now. My goodness, the time flies. I've just finished my third season as a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member, and this is my third year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Starting the season talking about basketball, talking about hockey, whatever you want it to be. Sports are getting good this time of year. By the way, please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. Now, today we're going to just have a very simple question with a very complicated answer for some guys. It's stay or go. Bring up the names of all the players on the roster currently, the guys that are under contract, the guys that are not under contract, and have a discussion. Sometimes it'll be a quick discussion depending on the player. Sometimes it'll be a lengthy one depending on the player, saying, should this player stay or should this player go? Now, what I'm going to do, just simply for the benefit of people listening, I do trust my opinion on some of these, but I'm going to frame it as what I think the Phillies are going to do. It's not so much, I don't like this player, I would get rid of him, or I like this player, I would keep him. I'm going to try and predict what the Phillies are going to do. I'm going to give you reasonable explanations for why I believe the Phillies are going to do that. It's clearly not going to be 100% correct, but I've been doing this for a couple of years, and I know what I'm talking about. I like to believe. So I'll give you justification on why position players, bullpen arms, or starters and coaching staff are going to either be here or not next year. And I have some contract information pulled up so that we could keep everything accurate as far as that's concerned. So without further ado, let's start with the position players on the Philadelphia Phillies. And as far as that's concerned, there's not a single position player that is not under team control next year. Even Austin Hayes, who you acquired at the deadline, you have a club option for 2025. So that puts you in a position where you could easily bring back everybody if you wanted to. Or you could look at a situation and say, we need to get better here. We need to get better there. And you can make some changes at certain positions. So let's just start at catcher with JT Realmuto. JT Realmuto's coming back. He's under contract through 2025. After that, he's a free agent. It very well could be his last year, but there's no way JT Realmuto is not playing in a Phillies uniform next year. There's just not. He's going to be back, nice and simple. Let's go to first base. And this is another simple one. Bryce Harper will never play in another uniform besides the Philadelphia Phillies uniform. He's not ready to hang it up yet. Not even close. Bryce Harper will be here. Second base is the first one where people might have a little bit of a what if type of conversation with Bryson Stott, right? Because Stott has been rough against lefties and hasn't put together the at-bats that we thought we were going to see from him after his first couple years in the majors. And then you still see the Gold Glove caliber defense, and he's a young player. So when you look at Bryson Stott, and he's arbitration eligible for still 3 more years after this exact season we're in right now. So what would that be, through 2027? You're not going to move on from him at this point. The upside is still too good there. He's a solid player. He needs to improve as well, but it's very hard to move on from talented arbitration-eligible players. That's going to be a theme we talk about throughout this episode. So Bryson Stott ain't going nowhere. Shortstop Trey Turner, major contract, not going to move him. Nothing's going to happen with Trey Turner. I know people are annoyed with his postseason performance. The organization will not move Trey Turner. Alec Boehm's interesting now over at third base. He made $4 million this past year. He's arbitration eligible. The estimate's around $8 million for what he could make in arbitration this coming year. He is arbitration eligible for 2 years. He will be a free agent in 2027. Bryson Stott, by the way, will be a free agent in 2028. unless the Phillies offer him a contract extension at some point before that. But here's where the Alec Boehm thing's so interesting, because he was really mopey during the postseason. He sat in game 2. It seems like he slumps in the biggest spots. It seems like mentally he's very defeated very often. Alec Boehm is. There's a real chance that the organization is doing heavy evaluation on whether or not they want Alec Boehm on this baseball team next year. Now, here's ultimately what the evaluations will come down to. Dave Dombrowski is not a fan of the Philadelphia Phillies. He is not a reactionary person. He is a dollars and cents, numbers and production type of guy. That's what makes him such a great president of baseball operations. And that's why I believe Alec Boehm is going to be on this team next year, because when you have an all-star starter at third base, and he is arbitration eligible for 2 more seasons, meaning you're getting a deal on that quality of player. It makes too much sense with some of the other major contracts this team has handed out to keep Alec Boehm on this team, simply for the financials of it, and believe that he has more consistent production in him like we see in stretches during seasons of the past. Alec Boehm ain't going anywhere, folks. It just doesn't seem likely that the Philadelphia Phillies will move on from him. You could trade him, I suppose, but are you getting better from an Alec Boehm trade? Not in the short term. And this is still a team with short-term goals. I firmly believe that. So if you're one of those Alec Boehm needs to go people, sorry, I don't think you're getting your wish here in the 2024-2025 offseason. Let's move to the starters in the outfield. Nick Castellanos is under contract through 2026. $20 million next year, $20 million in 2026. The weird thing about Castellanos, in a vacuum, I would say, dude, no way he's not on the team next year. Like, he's got to stay. He was their best hitter in the postseason. He was really good over the course of the regular season when you look at his total numbers. I know slow stretch to start the year, and then he really turned it on. He's a guy in the clubhouse that's important. He plays solid defense in right field. He played all 162 games. Why would you ever move on from that guy? But that's in a vacuum. What I know is the Phillies tried to offload that contract last year when it had $60 million remaining. I'd be surprised if they don't try and do the same this year with $40 million remaining, because as good as Nick Castellanos was, he's kind of the logjam in the outfield, where he costs significantly more money than the guy you had starting in center and the guy you had starting in left and the guy you traded for at the trade deadline. And if you move on from Nick Castellanos, it opens up a corner spot in the outfield, which is where a lot of talent lives in Major League Baseball. And it also allows you money to work with, and you're not moving on from some of the other names. So I believe, like, my gut feeling is that Nick Castellanos will be here again next year, because the value that he brings is greater than the value you could add by moving on from him. But that one's iffy. I'm very on the fence on Nick Castellanos. Sorry if that's your guy. He could not be on the team next year. We'll have to keep an eye on it. But that's definitely one of those red flags or I guess alarms are going off in my head when I think about Castellanos this offseason. Could he be moved? Kyle Schwarber's not going to be moved. We'll go to the DH real quick, just because he's right below Castellanos on this little salary sheet that I got here. Kyle Schwarber's owed $20 million next year, and then he's a free agent in 2026. It could be his final year. They could offer an extension at some point next season. But whatever the case, Kyle Schwarber will be the designated hitter of this baseball team in 2025. Center field with Johan Rojas is very, very interesting, because Johan Rojas is making zero money. He made $745,000 last year, which to me would be the paycheck of a lifetime. But on this scale, it's peanuts. He is pre-arbitration for the next 2 years and arbitration eligible for 3 years. They got him locked down forever. The problem is he hasn't hit, really. He's been better than some people expected him to be, but he hasn't been great. And you want to improve this team in the margins, and you have to do some shake-up stuff. It could certainly be Rojas. Now, I think Rojas is still on the team. I don't think he's a guy that you move, but he could be a guy that moves to the bench, and then in free agency, you add a starting caliber center fielder. Not with Merrifield, who might come here to be like a utility guy. No, like a true starting caliber center fielder. The only problem is that would really up payroll, which is why Nick Castellanos might be in trouble. My guess is that the organization is not ready to give up on Johan Rojas. He could be traded if a player like Luis Robert becomes available. He could be dumped for some salary, not that he's making much, or just for the roster spot if like Juan Soto becomes available, but that would require Nick Castellanos to be moved on from, and possibly Kyle Schwarber as well, to make that money work. Again, another one of those fence guys, but I'd say Johan Rojas is back simply because he makes no money, and you could have him as a bench piece with plus defense. Brandon Marsh, he is arbitration eligible for 3 more seasons. after the one that just completed. The problem is he gave you nothing this year. And you can't come back with a guarantee at catcher, first base, second base, shortstop, third base, even though third base is kind of iffy. Right field on the fence, center field on the fence, but possibly back. Like Brandon Marsh, to me, is the most likely starter from this past season that they're going to move on from, because the cutting your losses isn't that big, and the upside doesn't seem to be quite there anymore. And he's not a great defender like Yohan Ross. He's a good defender. And that's kind of the spot where I think it would be easiest to get better without giving up the highest ceiling. And Rojas' defense is why he is more valuable, I think, than Brandon Marsh. But you could say the same about Marsh's bat. I don't know. He's as much on the fence as Rojas, maybe more so. I think it's more likely than not Brandon Marsh is not on the team. We'll just go with some depth pieces. Austin Hayes is arbitration eligible. He made $6.3 million this year. I could see the Phillies keeping him in a depth role, especially if they move on from Brandon Marsh. I actually think it's more likely than not Austin Hayes is on the team next year. I know that might drive people insane. Give him a little bit of time. He had the hamstring injury. He had a kidney infection. I don't think we truly got to evaluate Austin Hayes for the baseball player he could be. I don't want him to start in left field, but I wouldn't mind him being a part of this team. And the only other guy worth mentioning, because the guys like Cody Clemens, like they're all arbitration eligible. Weston Wilson, these guys don't have the service time to be free agents yet, so they're cheap. And Mundo Sosa is arbitration eligible for the next 2 seasons. He ain't going nowhere. He's a great utility piece, a great teammate. This is what Dave Dombrowski did a couple years ago by locking down a bunch of guys or trading for guys with a lot of team control. Well, now you have comfortable bench depth that's locked down for a long time. So the main guys you're looking at, Castellanos for a salary dump, maybe Bone because he's mopey, and then the center fielder and the left fielder in Yohan Rojas and Brandon Marsh are in question for staying and going. But you see why there's not a lot of margin for change in the Philadelphia Phillies position player group. Is there for the bullpen? Because we know bullpen's volatile from year to year. These relievers move around a bunch. We'll have that discussion coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But let me tell you about Ibarra first, because, well, summer rounded out, all right? And it's time for fall. And if you're like me, what fall means is more time at the bar, more time watching football, more time going out with friends. The weather's perfect. You got to go to the pumpkin patch. You got to do all this stuff. And you know what you're doing every time you go? Swipe your card, swipe your card, swipe your card. You're spending money over and over and over again. Well, you know what Ibotta does for you? It puts more of that money back in your pocket. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure that you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, maybe that flight that you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner that you've been craving, or it might just cover you having a nice day out for the next Eagles game. I'm wearing my Eagles shirt today. Go Birds. Bottom line is, other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, you get cold, hard cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift card. Simply add offers in the app, upload your receipt, and voila, the money is all yours. It's super easy with Ibotta. Join the over 50 million users. It's about time you got in with them. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying. So go ahead and use the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register with Ibotta. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. All right, now here's where it gets tricky. This is where I'm going to be tested. The bullpen. The bullpen is such a weird spot, because if you wipe the 4 postseason games off the map, I'd say bring back everybody and pay them whatever they want. And then the postseason happened, and Jeff Hoffman didn't show up, and Matt Strahm didn't show up, and Jose Ruiz didn't show up, and Jose Alvarado barely pitched. And all of these guys that were high leverage relievers, it didn't really get the job done. And Carlos Estevez gives up a grand slam to Francisco Lindor that cost you game 4, that even though he was in a tough spot, was the nail in the coffin for the season. No one feels good about anybody in the bullpen, and I may never again. I'm going to be a scarred fan for the rest of my life. And when I'm sitting here at 60 years old, hopefully still hosting Locked On Phillies, you'll be hearing me talk about, I don't trust the bullpen anymore. I don't trust these bullpen pitchers. Remember 2024. And everyone's going to be like, Grandpa, what happened in 2024? I'm going to tell you how the Phillies bullpen collapsed. So it makes it hard to trust these guys. And it makes it hard to evaluate these guys. And also the volatility of bullpen pitchers is something well known across baseball. These guys move all the darn time. And a lot of good arms move all the damn time. So you could go ahead and you can retool your bullpen real quick if you wanted to. Or you could keep stuff very similar if you wanted to because of the Phillies contract situation. So let's go through it. So Matt Strahm got an extension. He is signed through 2025. He's here next year. That ain't changing. Jose Alvarado, he is signed for $9.02 million next year. He's under contract. He's not going anywhere. So those two arms. And I'm just going down. This is no particular order. This is the list that is put together by Baseball Reference with the contract pages. So Alvarado stays, Strahm stays. Estevez is the first big question. Now, he's going to be a free agent. He made $6.75 million. He's going to get closer money. Now, where I'm going to operate for closer money is going to be 3 years, $50 million total. So about something around $16.5 million a year. That was the estimate for Jeff Hoffman, who we'll talk about in a second. That's the estimate I'm going to use for Carlos Estevez. This basically comes down to do you want Estevez back or do you want Hoffman back? Because a lot of people believe that the Phillies will not pay both players closer caliber money. Now, what I know is John Middleton will throw around cash to guys he believes in. But I'm trying to be realistic here. I'm talking about what the Phillies would do. If it was me and I was John Middleton, I would say go sign both of them and shell out $100 million and make this work and pay the luxury tax and do whatever you have to do to bring back arms that you trust, even though they didn't have the best postseason. But realistically, it's probably going to be one of those guys. And I think Carlos Estevez is the safer option for a couple of reasons. One, as much as you love the Jeff Hoffman story of him coming out of nowhere, throwing batting practice to Bryce Harper, throwing simulated bats, and Bryce Harper's like, yo, we need this guy on the team, and then he becomes an all-star. Like, that's amazing, an amazing story. But that also points to, hey, is this guy really, like, when you don't have the pedigree, you wonder how long does this stretch where he's this elite pitcher continue? It's a little bit less of a sure thing than a guy like Estevez, who was really good in LA and really good here once you acquired him. And he has more of a pedigree and he's a closer, like by trade, a closer, not a guy in Jeff Hoffman that you'd have to try out as a closer next year. Estevez feels like the safer option. So if I had to guess, he's on the team next year. Jeff Hoffman not on the team. And not because they don't want him. It's because some other team's going to throw crazy money at Jeff Hoffman. So that's our first that's our first go in the stare go conversation with the bullpen. Junior Marte is pre-arb. He shouldn't be on the actual true roster. He shouldn't be at the major league level, but he should still be here. I'm just going through some of these names. Colby Allard, arbitration eligible, probably not going anywhere. Dylan Covey, arbitration eligible, probably not going anywhere. Oh, shoot. I missed the position player. Garrett Stubbs, arbitration eligible. He's a guy you can move on from as a depth piece. He's a guy that I believe will go. I believe the Phillies make a change at backup catcher this year to mitigate JT Realmuto's getting older. We'll just say that in the nicest way possible. But I just caught him as I was scrolling down here, so far down. Tanner Banks, pre-arb for 2025. He will be here. You traded for him. I think he is a nice lefty-lefty matchup. I think he's a guy that adds depth to the bullpen. He's not going to be too expensive. That's a guy that I believe will still be on the team. Orion Kirkring is still pre-arbitration for 2 more years. There's no way he's going anywhere. He's unbelievable. So he will stay. Going down even further, you look at it, Jose Ruiz is arbitration eligible. He will continue to be with the team. He was actually pretty good this year. So those are the guys you're looking at and say, okay, I feel pretty good about all of those guys returning besides either Estevez or Hoffman. You add one more guy to the bullpen, and then you go to work. Okay, so right now we have what in the go column? 2 starting position players, maybe. 1 reliever, with a possibility that John Middleton pays both of them, a backup catcher. That's about it. There's not that much margin for change with this team. Will it change when we look at the starters? Probably not. And we're even going to add in some staff members, and that's probably not going to change. If you're noticing a theme here, folks, the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025 are going to look a heck of a lot like the Philadelphia Phillies in 2024. That might scare some of you, but this is reality for what the organization is most likely going to do. And I will talk about coming up one thing that could change that as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though, because this is such a great time of year for sports. You have the rest of the postseason for baseball, which I know you're not watching because you're a Phils fan and you're probably heartbroken like the rest of us. But forget about baseball for a second. The NFL's rolling right now. You got some great stuff you can bet on all the time with the NFL. Oh, and if you want to bet during the week or you want to find your fix with the college game, college football has never been more interesting. Basketball starting soon. The preseason's rolling. Hockey got going last week. There's just so much to bet on, and FanDuel's the number one place to do it. America's number one sports book, and not only can you bet before the games, you might get a hunch in the middle of the game. Well, on FanDuel, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You know how hard it is to go from one app to another to figure out, okay, I want to bet this, I like the odds, but let's see if he's playing, and let's see what's going on in the game, and oh, I missed it, and they just scored, and I should bet the over right now or the under. It's too much to keep track of. That's why FanDuel puts it all together for you. And you'll also get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, stay or go with the starters is pretty simple, but there may be a guy out here that you forgot about. So Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola aren't going anywhere. No conversation, major contracts. Don't worry about that at all. Christopher Sanchez got an extension. He ain't going anywhere. Don't worry about it. No conversation there at all. That's three guys. Ranger Suarez is arbitration eligible in 2025. He is not going anywhere, especially after that postseason performance. He pitched a gem in Game 4. It sucks it ended the way that it did. Ranger Suarez is a monster. He needs to stay healthy. He needs to get used to the workload some more, but he's very, very good. So, yeah, your top four in the rotation are not changing. Now, Ranger Suarez is a free agent in 2026, so you need to get a contract on there. That'll be a big offseason goal for Dave Dombrowski, I'm sure. But the top four guys in the rotation ain't changing. Somebody that definitely is changing is, well, Spencer Turnbull. Spencer Turnbull is a free agent this offseason. I can't see the team bringing him back. And it's unfortunate because he had the major injury that cost him the second half of the season. He had a really good start to the season. I don't know that we have enough conversation about what could this team have been if Spencer Turnbull had been healthy. If he's your fifth starter, if he's winning you 60% of his starts, as opposed to Taijuan Walker's basically 0% of his starts. I wonder. But I don't think Spencer Turnbull is on this team next year. The only way he would be is if he's a guy that you sign to a minimal contract and you say, buddy, we're going to use you a little bit, but then when Andrew Painter's ready to come up or when Andrew Painter's ready to be a full starter, he's got that role. And I don't know if he wants to sign that. So I would expect Spencer Turnbull to not be back with the team, and I would expect another Turnbull-esque player to be added in free agency. They will add a fifth starter, I believe, in free agency, but I believe Andrew Painter will get every opportunity to earn that position in spring training, which is scary because if your rotation is Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez, Suarez, Painter, just don't even bring your bats to the game. Just sit down, other team, whoever you are. That will be an unbelievable pitching staff. Spencer Turnbull, I would imagine he will go. Taijuan Walker, well, this is where it gets tough because he's owed a lot of money. Taijuan Walker is just, I mean, he's stealing money right now. He's owed $18 million in 2025 and $18 million in 2026. Now, by my math, that is $36 million still on the contract. Will another team eat that? Absolutely not. He's unpitchable at the major league level right now. Will the Phillies eat that? They better, because he can't still be on this team. He doesn't give you anything. He's absolutely, I don't think he's fixable. I don't. So I would move on from him this offseason or in spring training. I would be so done with Taijuan Walker, and the organization should be, and I believe they are. I believe they'll find a way to eat that salary. And while you do have to pay it, it does go ahead and change the way that you look about your current payroll. Taijuan Walker is a guy that cannot be on this team next year. He is an absolute must-go with the pitching staff. And maybe that means you bring back Spencer Turnbull. Maybe that means you sign somebody else. But Walker's the most go of any player on this roster. Then Turnbull is the next highest go rate for the pitchers, and everybody else is locked in under contract. So you're not doing anything there as far as that's concerned. That was simple, right? This is why I saved the starting pitchers for last, and this is why I also combined them, I should say, with the coaching staff, because the coaching staff may be a more interesting conversation. The pitching coach, Caleb Cotham. The staff was really good this year. Your bullpen was unbelievable. Your starters, you had 3 starters as all-stars. You had 2 relievers as all-stars. 5 members of your pitching staff going to the all-star game. Crazy. I know it doesn't win you any rings or hang any banners, but still, the pitching has been really good with Caleb Cotham here. He's got his job. As far as Kevin Long is concerned, I think people really, really overvalue what a hitting coach brings or the problems a hitting coach can make. I don't think Kevin Long goes anywhere. Now, if they do it, it's because they want to change the approach. And it's not so much that Kevin Long hasn't been successful in creating a strong offense. It will be, hey, dude, we love it, but it doesn't seem to work for the players that we have, and we can't move on from a lot of players. So we need someone with a different approach. So we'll put in a great word for you to go get a great job somewhere else. I think it's more likely than not he's still here, but I do think that there's a chance that Kevin Long is no longer the hitting coach of this team. I don't think the organization's ready to move on from him. I think they like the consistency. I think he works well with the veteran players. I think that's a guy that's going to stay with the organization until this core of like Schwarber and Realmuto and Castellanos, they end up going other places. That will be when you move on from Kevin Long. Rob Thompson. Rob Thompson, a tough one, right? He's under contract for next year. I don't think there's any darn way that Rob Thompson is not the manager of this team next year. I don't think it's possible. They offered him the contract extension. He's got 1 more year. After that year, if things don't go to plan, they'll say, hey, we're done. If he wins the World Series or comes close to it, they might say, hey, do you have another year or 2 in you? But he's old, man. Like, all due respect to Topper. I like Rob Thompson. He's an older manager who got his shot and didn't expect it, was considering retirement before he was given this shot. He doesn't have, he's not, in 20 years, you're not going to see Rob Thompson managing a Major League Baseball team. In 15 years, you're not going to see it. He's got a couple more years left. He's under contract for 1 more. I'd expect this coming season to very possibly be his last. But because of that, you say, well, we'll ride it out for 1 more. It's not like we're pot committed to this guy, but he's been good enough, just won the division, won 95 games. We got to keep him. That's what the organization is thinking right now. That's why Rob Thompson's still going to be with this team. Sam Fuld, the GM. I think he is tied to Dave Dombrowski. I think he goes as Dave Dombrowski goes, and Dombrowski ain't going nowhere, folks. Anyone who's mad at Dave Dombrowski for what he did this offseason doesn't understand how bad we could have it, right? Or during this regular season, I should say as well. He makes moves. He is aggressive. He will make things happen for the Phillies. Not all of them work out, but he's a master at bringing in team-controlled players. He is a master at finding fit in this locker room. He has been the mastermind. I know Bryce Harper gets a lot of credit. Dave Dombrowski does as well, but Dave Dombrowski is the guy, the architect of this team. He put all these contracts together. He brought in all these players. He signed guys in free agency. He is an absolute gem to have in an organization, and we'll get annoyed at him, but that's like your filet mignon being slightly overcooked. There's dudes out there eating cheeseburgers that would love a taste of filet. And Dave Dombrowski is a very, very good front office executive. He is not going anywhere. If you think he is, go ahead and take a look at how some of the other teams in baseball operate and conduct their business, because that's why Dave Dombrowski, as long as he wants to be the president of baseball operations for this team, he will be the president of baseball operations for this team. So I think the coaching staff stays the same. The Kevin Long is the only guy that's really kind of on the potential chopping block to me, and that would be more of a reactionary move just to change approach. It could be done, but I don't think anyone else moves. I'm not going through any of the other like the bench coaches or the base running coaches or anything. We're not going to, all due respect to those coaches, waste our time going every member of the Phillies organization. But that's what I'm seeing as far as that's concerned. And then, of course, there is the ownership. So let's just say real quick for anyone wondering, you haven't mentioned John Middleton. He's the guy who cuts the check, but he's also the one where the buck stops here. John Middleton's still a very good owner. He does everything he can for this team to win. He's the least of our worries when it comes to the Philadelphia Phillies. He will cut the check. He ain't going anywhere. This ownership group, I hope they never sell. I hope it's John Middleton or John Middleton's family for a long, long time. But through all of that, through all of the players and the coaches and everything, we have a maybe with the coaching staff. We have Taijuan Walker and Spencer Turnbull with the pitching rotation. And Turnbull wasn't even in the rotation for most of the year. So that's 2, maybe 3 guys. The bullpen, we have 1, maybe 2. That's 4 guys, let's call it. And then with the position players, maybe 2 guys, maybe 3 guys. Let's just call it 7 possible changes for the Philadelphia Phillies. You're getting largely the same team next year, folks. So you better buckle up and get used to it and understand that this is what they kind of have to do and that they'll try and work in the margins. And that's going to be a tough thing mentally for us to overcome. But the further we get away from the heartbreak of the loss to the Mets, the more I think we can stomach saying, and not so much run it back, but hey, the core of this team needs to stay the same. That's what's going to happen. So if you're not coming to terms with that yet, you're going to have to get there by the time the offseason's over. But this episode is over, so thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it very much. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day here on Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out. And I will talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.